Good evening. Thank you very much. It really is more than a pleasure and express honor to be here amongst all of you. And I have to say that this hall is oozing with wealth, both metaphorically as well as literally. And I was excited to be here, but now I'm a bit worried because I just hope nobody has informed the CBI or the ED. यहाँ पे रेड करोगे आपके साथ मैं भी निकल जाऊँगा. No, but it really.
Very good wealth manager here.
There already is a contempt of court case against me. I don't want. PR is waiting. I don't want Bangalore Central Jail. No, but it really is a real pleasure. And thank you so much to WMG and Rajesh for inviting me. It really is a real pleasure. And I said more than pleasure, it's honor to see such luminaries and in this gathering. The topic that I chose amongst a plethora of those given to me was India at 2047. And one of the reasons for that is that I can say anything I want. I won't be alive in 2047. So nobody can say, "Arey, like a politician, tumne to ye bola tha, ye nahi hua." No, but to be honest, I think it's always great to gaze at this ball and to predict what might happen, what might India be, this country that we love and inhabit in 2047. So I thought, let me pen down a few thoughts, and then we'll open it up, and I'll try and keep it as interactive as possible, because ultimately, as all of you know, my distaste for politicians, and one of the reasons is that in whatever field or subject I venture in, having identified myself firmly as a jack of all trades and master of none, one of the things that I make it a point is to, whatever I do, I must learn something myself. So I won't be didactic or preachy, please, I assure you, and I'll have the floor open for as many questions, interesting questions that I can learn from. So just a brief, maybe 30 minutes or 30 to 40 minutes of what I have to say, and then we'll have a wonderful interaction, hopefully. Sorry.
40 minutes, it will be time for 30 seconds.
A time for 30 seconds. Yeah, this time I'll hopefully steal a little bit more than 30 seconds if I'm allowed to do so. So to begin then with the topic that itself is India at 2047. Now, I thought in order for me to even begin to predict how India would be in 2047, roughly 25 years from now, for politicians, it's very easy to predict. Everything would be, a Garden of Eden, and we would be developed, and everything would be hunky-dory, and we would be what America is now or China is going to be in 5-10 years. But if one has to be realistic, then I thought the best way to predict would be to go back 25 years and see where we were and how much of it could we have predicted 25 years ago, that out here we are in a stage where we want to predict 25 years ahead. So 25 years ago, roughly 1997, would we have predicted the sort of things or the sort of country that we have today? Now, let's look at some of the parameters then in 1997. If I was to give a talk to a gathering of CFOs in 1997, first of all, there definitely would have been a CBI raid in 1997. Every CFO, rather than being in companies or investment bankers, would have been a CFO in a brick-and-mortar company. A lot has changed. But how much of what has changed could we have predicted in 1997? And I dare say, not a lot. Not a lot we could have predicted. We were still barely removing the shackles of socialism. P.V. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh were doing that for us. It is debatable whether they did it on their own or they were forced to do so by the World Bank and the IMF. In fact, there's a delightful Lakshman cartoon where P.V. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh are coming out of a World Bank and IMF meeting, and Dr. Manmohan Singh is telling him, nobody twisted our arms, and all their arms are in a spiral. I don't know whether you've seen it. It's like a cloth being wrung like that. It's like, 20 twists in each arm. So it's debatable. And I'll tell you why it's debatable through the course of the next 30 minutes, because trust me, a politician, and it might be very cynical, but a politician very rarely does have India's interests at heart. It's one of those sad things. And some of them might do, but then they take a U-turn the moment they find that India's interest at heart would mean that my party's interest or my electoral results would suffer. Then they quickly take it back. Given the fact that we had to mortgage our gold back in 1991. In fact, the gold, some of you would definitely know this, was stacked onto ships, and the ships sailed to Bank of England. Our foreign reserves were not even $1 billion. They're $600 billion now. It was $0.8 billion. But we decided to change. In 75 years, for that brief period of 5 years, India junked socialism. That's because of Dr. Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao. And because we did it, so many things that are reality today, 2023, we could not have predicted back in 1997. We just could not have. Because the psyche, it takes time for us to realize that if you are junking socialism, then essentially what you're doing, some of my points, sorry. I could see my points running away with. then I would really have been like a politician, just blabbering on and without any rhyme or reasons. And just to give you, now that they were taking away the table, I've looked at the points, and one of the things that I said, how we could be wrong in 1997, predicting what we would be in 2023. One of the great Indians, one of the greatest ever, Dr. Abdul Kalam, predicted in 1997 what he brought out a brochure called Vision 2020. I don't know how many of you have read that. It was that India would be developed by 2020. That is what Dr. Kalam said in 1997, 25 years ago. So if he could be wrong, for me to predict what India would be in 2047, I could get it spectacularly long. But what I do see some trends, and I only got to know this very late on, that there is a post like CFO, there is a futurologist post as well. Many companies have this futurologist, and it's a wonderful thing that all you do is you try and predict the future. I think that's wonderful, and you get paid for it as well. So to put the hat on of a futurologist, I can confidently do that in science. But in order for me to do that in other fields, quote unquote, less boring fields for many of you, I would have to be very realistic. And let me put this disclaimer that people invite me usually only once. It's something that I have started to take pride in. Dobara nahi bulate mujhe. So maybe it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. I don't know, Rajesh, you're going to call me again. But I think it kind of lessens the weight on my shoulders. I can really say what I really want to say. I was called to an event organized by FICCI on how BJP is tackling corruption. And for the next half an hour, I talked about corruption in BJP. I was never invited to FICCI again. A very dear friend, Rajya Sabha MP no less, he organized a one-day symposium on dynasty, the curse of Indian politics. And of course, the intention was to basically thrash Congress. And I went on the podium, and for the next 10 minutes, I took the names of 95 BJP MLAs and MPs who were dynasts. I was never called again. Very recently, they made the mistake of inviting me to a symposium, G20, no less, organized by the government of India, where the lieutenant governor of a state said something, and I followed, and I said, this fellow should be suspended for a month. so obviously I'm never going to be invited there again. But so I just say with all humility that I have all my life being in no position of power or politics as an academic, really cherished this fact, and I've almost, I state it as an axiom now, that in order for us to improve, we must mock all isms except criticism. So when I mix this India at 2047, and there is a byline to that, unraveling the true spirit of India and the land of opportunities, can I have a show of hands here as to how many of you think that India is a land of opportunities? Almost every hand has gone up. Even someone from Pakistan, his hand has also gone up. No, just joking.
Like you said, 2047 is long.
I don't mind the CBI rate, but I don't mind mentioning Pakistan, NSA also coming in here. That would be like really something. All the hands shot up. Now the next question I want you to answer truthfully. How many of you believe, and this will go a long way in answering the question India at 2047, that India is a land of missed opportunities? Show of hands, please. Again, almost all hands have gone up. So is it not important for me that rather than talk about India being a land of opportunities, that you've heard that lecture by every politician worth his or her salt, goes on and on for 2 hours, 3 hours, is for us to point out how and why this great nation, populated by amazing minds, went on to become a land of missed opportunities. Unless we realize that, how are we going to transform ourselves into a land of opportunities? I put it to you that so much worse than India being a land of opportunities is India being a land of missed opportunities. And it's a crying shame, but it is a fact. And I think we have to tackle that question much more than tackling the question of India being a land of opportunities. All of you, I dare say, know that to be a fact. But how many of us talk about freely about the fact that India is a land of missed opportunities? So I thought in the next 20, 30 minutes that I have, I will try and break it down into what India could have been in various domains, especially in the domain of science, because that really is important, us looking front ahead 2047. But in other domains as well, in our health, human health, in the way we live, in politics, and lastly, of course, in businesses and industry that are going to catapult us. So let me begin with science. Let me talk about the things where we've missed the bus and we shouldn't have. And for each of these domains, I will give a couple of examples because there are many more. But these are so stark and they stare you in the face that you, honestly, tears roll down sometimes when you see what could have been. And one of the most starkest examples that I can think of happened recently because of COVID. And, COVID has touched all our lives, we know that. It's utterly bizarre that 2 years ago, to envisage a scenario like this, where we would be packed in a hall and none of us would be wearing a mask, was almost unthinkable. We came out of it, but a lot of devastation happened. And the one that made us survive this devastation, largely, is actually the vaccination. And I would say this, before I talk about the missed opportunities, I also want to talk about the opportunities that we took. And one of the greatest achievements of India post-independence has been the fact that within a period of 1 year, we administered 2 billion vaccine doses. I think that would go down as one of the greatest achievements, if not of Modi, of Indian government, of India. It's absolutely phenomenal. We accepted it, we wanted it, and we did it. But then that's not the missed opportunity I'm talking about. Shall I go and tell that to the family members of the people who lost their lives? In every family, no one was untouched by the COVID tragedy. I myself, my cousin, even though he was a doctor, he succumbed to COVID. So many others, my colleagues died suddenly. The devastation was caused by the Delta wave, as we know, in 2021, around May. And it was truly devastating. You could see in Delhi, I don't know, I think Bangalore was also terribly hit, but Delhi was one of the epicenters of it. You could see lines, queues worth running down kilometers, people waiting for oxygen cylinder. And that is when you realize that one person vaccinated was one oxygen cylinder less. It's literally vaccines saved lives. So the next question is, how do you rank the success or failure of a medical achievement or a medical intervention? It's very simple. Business comes secondary. Of course, it comes. But it is how many lives did a new drug or a new vaccine save. When push comes down to it, comes to shove, that is the only barometer. And we literally were not able to save lives. Millions died because they could not be vaccinated. And I'll tell you the missed opportunity here. Because India, rightly so, for the last 20 years, 25 years, has been called, and many amongst you would know this. There is a gentleman I saw is actually making a flu vaccine. Fantastic. India has been called the world hub, world vaccine hub. And not for no reason. It is a fact. You have the Serum Institute, you had Bharat Biotech, so many other companies. When it comes to polio vaccines, HCV vaccines, so many other vaccines, rotavirus, we literally were giving vaccines to the world. So if at all there was a place on this planet that could have very quickly brought out an anti-COVID vaccine, it was India. But did that happen? On 12th of January 2020, China published the SARS-CoV-2 genome, 12th of January. On 13th of January, Moderna applied for the patent and the phase 1 clinical trials of their vaccine. Less than 24 hours. And we are the world hub for vaccines. In 9 days' time from 12th of around 21st January, CDC in Atlanta cultured the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It took us 3 months and a month more to deliver, to culture the NIV cultured the virus, a month more to deliver that virus to Bharat Biotech so they could use beta-propiolactone to inactivate it and then start making the vaccine. Those 3.5 months, it does not augur well for a world hub, especially when America is doing it in 24 hours and it's not even recognized as making vaccines. 3.5 months delay. Now, in any normal circumstance, like right now, we don't have a pandemic, we don't have an emergency. You come up with rotavirus vaccine, you have HCV. You can take years for it to develop. And vaccines take years. Rotavirus has taken 15 odd years, and even then the efficacy is 55%. Flu vaccine, so many other vaccines. That doesn't matter. What matters is in a pandemic where millions are dying, in May of 2021, those people who were not vaccinated were crying out for oxygen cylinders that were not supplied to them. If 3.5 months before May they could have been vaccinated, we could have saved them. And this is where the crux is, the inflection point. This is where the boys separate from the men. When you say that we are the best, you have to prove it. And I have no hesitation in saying this. We are fantastic in the field of science, really good, but we were found wanting. We were not the world hub. That is just one example. Not only that, if you look at that month of May, even if we had the vaccines, we were vaccinating at a rate of 0.6 million a day. And we were crying out. But after the Delta wave ebbed, somehow miraculously the rate of vaccinations picked up and we started vaccinating 20 to 25 million a day, celebrating them as grand occasions. But the time had already passed. People had died. People who could not be vaccinated. Which head rolled? I'm not saying that the responsibility completely lies on the Prime Minister or the President or his Council of Ministers. But who carried the can? Did the population even ask those questions? That's the tragedy. That is what is called a classic missed opportunity. And it is tragic because this is not an opportunity that we missed for making billions. It is an opportunity that we missed for saving lives, which is so much more than making money. That's just one example. Let me give you another pertinent example that is not so tragic, but going forward, 2047 it would be. How many of you know this lady called Lakshmi Kutti? Okay, not one hand has gone up. And 2 years ago, if I was in this audience, even I would not have raised my hand. Lakshmi Kutti is an 85-year-old woman of a very slight frame, 5 feet. She lives in the tribal jungles of Tamil Nadu bordering Karnataka. And she got the Padma Shri Award 3 years ago. She has spent 60 years of her 85 years in collecting medicinal plants from the Western Ghats. She has a collection of 500 such medicinal plants. She has been treating the villagers and tribals for thousands of years, for decades. Thousands of them have been treated by Lakshmi Kutti. I think it was great that the government awarded Lakshmi Kutti. It was absolutely fantastic. She's phenomenal. But what happens after that? What happens to those 500 medicinal plants? What happens to that cornucopia of immense knowledge? That is the real wealth. And if you don't believe me, the next example that I give you will bring out this problem as stark as any problem could ever be. What if one of those medicinal plants were to give you a molecule that would cure cancer, malaria, tuberculosis, COVID, HIV? The company that isolated it would be $1 billion company overnight. And it is not just a fact that this is a flight of fancy of a scientist that you dream of such things. You know about the example of artemisinin. Artemisinin, so there are only 2 prominent drugs that cure malaria. One is chloroquine, that was isolated more than 100 years ago. That comes from the bark of a tree. And malaria, it's almost useless because the plasmodium, the parasite, has developed resistance to chloroquine. So, and of course, it's a very dangerous drug now. It causes neuropsychosis and all that stuff. So not many people take chloroquine, but the other drug is artemisinin. And by and large, the world is safe because right now there isn't much resistance against artemisinin, although in Southeast Asia that resistance is growing. So medicine is a constant process for discovering newer and newer drugs. In malaria, you have only 2 drugs. And artemisinin, the lady who discovered it, Chinese lady, she got the Nobel Prize 3 years ago. And all Indian scientists, including me, yours truly, are in this rat race of publishing, let's say, in Nature and Science, the journals where impact factor of 70, cell 60. She discovered it from a leaf, just like one of Lakshmi Kutti's plants, this Chinese lady. She isolated artemisinin. She published that paper in an impact factor of 0.9. The impact factor of the journal was not even 1. And this is the tragedy. We forgot about Lakshmi Kutti after we gave her the Padma. While we should have by now 500 Lakshmi Kutti Natural Products Institutes. Each one of them tasked with taking one plant and isolating the active ingredient from there, and then testing various diseases. And I bet you this is what the West is going to do. They won't even wait till 2047. And a time will come when American scientists will take one of Lakshmi Kutti's plants, will isolate a molecule which is more potent than Taxol or epithelone, cures cancer magically. They would get the Nobel Prize, and we would be so enamored that we would give Lakshmi Kutti a posthumous Padma Award, Padma Bhushan. Now, is that opportunity or is that missed opportunity? And I say this not just because we are new to this field. The tragedy is that we almost invented this field of natural products chemistry. If you go back to 1930s, 1940s and 50s, India was a world leader at natural products chemistry. Not many of us know, and my next book is on India's forgotten scientists, which is another tragedy of its own making. There are scientists, from Bangalore itself, Professor G.N. Ramachandran, who should have got not just one Nobel Prize, but 3 Nobel Prizes for phi-psi plot, for CAT scan tomography, and for collagen triple helical structure, but leave alone a Nobel Prize or a Bharat Ratna, it didn't even get a paltry Padma. There are so many cases like that. There is Colonel Chopra, who's the father of pharmacology, who meticulously, like Lakshmi Kutty, he catalogued 6,000 Indian plants. He isolated the drug Reserpine from Sarpagandha in the 1950s. He didn't patent it. Siba Gaigi took it. And for 7 years, from 54 to 61, Reserpine was the world's largest selling drug. This is our history. Rather than being proud of it, rather than carrying it on, we've almost forgotten it. And I'll tell you the tragedy, that library of 500 medicinal plants from the Western Ghats diversity, Lakshmi Kutty plants as I call them, would unfortunately die along with her. That's the tragedy. So I just hope till we reach 2047, someone amongst you is able to realize this, because I sincerely believe politicians don't have the power in this country anymore. They don't take steps in national interest. And I'm saying this, don't see this as a political statement. Because as I always say, don't bring politics into science, because then you will end up with this political science. But the fact of the matter is, these are the questions that we have to answer now. We can't just sit back and wait for 2047. We cannot gloat in the fact that India's economy has overtaken UK's economy, the GDP. I'm sorry, what matters is not GDP, but what matters is GDP per capita. We are $2,000 now. UK is $49,000. What are we gloating about? When we talk about what was the situation 25 years ago in 1997, our GDP per capita was $500. So we increased it by 4-fold. But UK's was $19,000. And now it is $49,000. So these are the questions that I don't want politicians to answer. And that is my only thing going forward. Leaving the field of science, because I'll tell you what, and here I can put the gaze into the crystal ball and tell you the positive things that might happen as far as just science is concerned. If you look at around 1997, and a wonderful pie chart was brought out by the government of India, which is great at making all these pie charts. And it showed that Indians, 75% of the Indians then, 25 years ago, the diseases that afflicted them, 75% of them were communicable diseases and 25% of them are non-communicable diseases. In 2023, it again brought out the pie chart and it has completely flipped. 75% of the diseases that inflict Indians are actually communicable diseases. And just 25% are non-communicable. What it tells you is that with increasing wealth and prosperity, we are actually shifting the graph towards non-communicable diseases, heart ailments, diabetes, obesity, so many other cases like that. And of course, science and medicine going forward would have to address it, because in 2047, I can confidently predict that there will be no malaria. Because there will be no mosquito. Humans would have decided and voted on it that we don't need this pest. There is a lot of controversy going on. There is a technology called CRISPR-Cas9 and gene drive, whereby they are actually making mosquitoes infertile and then releasing them. By 2047, I predict there will be no malaria, there would be no tuberculosis. But we will have a huge plethora of diseases that we haven't seen before that are afflicting us because of our lifestyle. They would be lifestyle diseases. And gene therapy would be very normal, very common. We would have other things to worry about that, unfortunately, as it happens, because the business of making money is now very closely intertwined with the business of science. You would have a lot of Indians wanting to get fairer through gene therapy. They have already shown it. It happens in mice. You can tinker with a few genes, CRISPR-Cas9, and brown mice becomes white. So these are a lot of ethical and moral questions that science would have to answer going forward. But as far as diseases and health is concerned, I think we would be much safely placed in 2047 than we are now, provided we take these steps, the couple of steps that I talked about of missed opportunities. Let me very swiftly now come to the other 2 or 3 things that I want to talk about, because intertwined very closely with science are the 2 things that unfortunately no politician, even, and there are some esteemed journalists sitting amongst us. I say esteemed because I don't want him to say anything wrong about me in tomorrow's newspaper.
Disclaimer, I'm not a journalist.
You're not a journalist, all right. Okay, we all have plus points. But one of the facts that I keep saying that there ought to be more science in journalism, because journalism has to not be selective, talk about prior events, and be objective. Cite what has happened before. These are all scientific exercises that happen naturally. But more than that, there ought to be more journalism in science. Because one of the things that will save us in 2047 would be genetically modified food and genetically modified organisms. And I'm sorry, but I don't see any debate whatsoever in the national psyche. No one is talking about it. No politician is talking about it. And it is one of the greatest tragedy. We will not be able to feed our population without the aid of science and without the aid of GMO. It's as simple as that. Sub-Saharan African nations are ahead of us. Bangladesh has okayed BT brinjal. You have Sudan, you have Congo that has okayed golden rice. 110 Nobel laureates have said that GMOs are absolutely safe. You are weaponizing rice by putting vitamins in it. There's nothing wrong with it. And even if you might feel apprehensive, give the people a choice. Because at the heart of progress, scientific or otherwise, is choice. You leave it to the person to decide. Don't patronize him or her. Leave it to him. Let him choose. And I'll talk of non-food GMO that the government gave a choice. I'm talking about BT cotton. Did you know 10 years ago, India did not grow any BT cotton? They gave the farmers a choice. And right now, 99% of the cotton that India produces is actually BT cotton. This is what happens. You give a choice. In anything, in any field, the bedrock of progress is choice. And where is the choice we are giving? You had an acclaimed, eminent Indian scientist who's the inventor of GM mustard. He has to quit science. The government arrested him. His fields were burnt by the NGOs. Professor Paintel, I'm talking about. It's a real tragedy. We aren't talking about it. Where are we going to get the food from? And trust me, I've crunched all the numbers. We have 110 million tons of rice being produced every year. Our buffer stock is 55 million tons of rice that the government procures because it wants to placate its vote bank and give MSP that increase year on year, a Soviet Union relic. 55 million tons is rotting in the FCI godowns. We don't have the need for it. The only entities consuming it are rats. And yet, we force Punjab to grow more and more rice. The second important entity that we have to worry about, it's an emergency, it's a catastrophe. I'm not talking about 2047. I'm talking about 2037. Did you know in the last 40 years, our water consumption per capita has gone down by more than 55%. It used to be 2,800 cubic meters in the mid-1980s. Now it is 1,200. We won't have water to drink and irrigate. It's not a flight of fancy or I'm just trying to scare you. These are figures, actual data. Where will we irrigate all the food that we want to grow from? And you know the real tragedy? 63%. India is blessed with water. You have the monsoon, you have the glaciers, but 63% of the water that can be drunk or can be used for irrigation, 63% goes into the oceans every year. For 20 years, we've collected the best ecologists, geologists, scientists, engineers, environmentalists through the orders of the Supreme Court. I can quote you judgments, 2004, 2003, during the time of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, even before that, to link rivers. Supreme Court, and I quote Supreme Court saying, it is criminal that one part of India is facing drought and 300 kilometers away, you are having excess rainfall. In the last 9 years, there has not been a single proper linked river. Instead, we have politicians taking pride in water trains. You remember 3 years ago to Latur, the politicians started this water train, wagons upon wagons of train, and they were cutting ribbons for it. They were proud of having started. They should be ashamed. If I was, I would have suspended that guy who is feeling proud of these water trains. Link the rivers. Especially when you have scientists and engineers and ecologists saying that yes, it is sound, the process is sound. You will always have the naysayers. You will always. But there is a way to go about doing it, and I'll give you the example. The Narmada Dam, it has taken 45 years. It was envisaged when Pandit Nehru was alive, 1963. And it came to fruition during the time of Prime Minister Modi. With its raised height, with God knows how many times Supreme Court had to come in and castigate all the fake environmentalists. Its raised height, now it irrigates 2.4 million hectares of farmland, generates enough power to light up 1.4 million homes, provides drinking water to 33 million people. Just one dam, Narmada Dam. We have the figures with us. It is not a question of missed opportunity when you don't see the solution. That is the tragedy. We have the solutions before us, and we are not working towards them. And you know, one of the things how much time do I have, Rajesh? We have enough time? Yeah. Right, okay. 15 more minutes, yes. I don't want, suddenly what happens, the power goes off, the mic goes off, and then I don't want that. But I was just finishing on this fact. Because I talked about India's greatest achievement since independence, about vaccinating twice over 1 billion people. India's greatest reform, many people would have their own favorite reforms, but for me, having calculated how do you rate the greatness of a reform? For me, it is how many lives it improves. It's not a question of there are some great reforms, much needed reforms, but they help about 100 people or 100,000 people. Here was a reform that this government undertook, implemented for a year, that promised to change the lives of not only 300 million people who were directly involved in the sector, but catapult India into a middle-income economy in 10 years. And I'm talking about the farm bills. And it is such an incalculable tragedy that the very 3 farm bills that were almost verbatim in the manifesto of the opposition parties, and I know it because I've seen it, point number 11 in the Congress manifesto, point number 19 in TMC manifesto, in AAP manifesto, those very 3 farm reforms, the moment Modi implemented them, these very parties took a U-turn and said these are black acts. What do you do when the very people who have consecrated those reforms in their manifestos take a U-turn? Is that national interest? Is that how you would progress and reach 2047? It is the biggest missed opportunity, and it is a crying shame, and I'll tell you why it is. Because India is unique, tragically unique. And the only people who would, after hearing this, I have hope, who would change it, would be this hall and the population of this hall. Because 44% of our active labor force, which is 515 million Indians, 44% of that is involved in agriculture. While agriculture as a sector contributes only 12.5 to 13% to our GDP. From produce to purchase, the whole chain is absolutely medieval, archaic. No one dared to change this until this government came along and brought in these 3 farm reforms. 82% of all Indian households are dependent upon agriculture. 95% of Indian farmers are not insured. 170,000 Indian farmers have committed suicide in the last 18 years. I can go on and on and on. It's a tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy, layer upon layer upon layer of it. And what did these 3 farm reforms promise? One was not to remove the government mandis, APMC, but to give farmers a choice, which is any rational and logical Indian must do, and a logical and rational Indian must get. Imagine one of you started a business, but the government said, you cannot sell your product any other place except our portal. There would be an outrage. You would say, why the hell I want to sell on Amazon, Flipkart? I must be given a choice. Then how the hell was Indian farmer denied that choice? Number 1, that reform. Number 2, to remove or to severely tinker the Essential Commodities Act. Now that was very important for the businesses to be brought into this field of agriculture. Because what happens is, because we are monsoon dependent, the farmers make a produce, but they have to sell it very quickly because there aren't many godowns. And rightly so, because no one was prepared to make these godowns, because the government on its whims and fancies would suddenly bring in the Essential Commodities Act. And storage, in an Orwellian doublespeak, would be termed by the government as hoarding. Can you imagine? You build the state-of-the-art godown, and suddenly you're storing some produce which would go bad, but the godown allows you to sell it for the next 1 year. And the government says, you're not storing it, you're hoarding it. Non-bailable offense. Which businessman would want to make godowns? This bill changed that, promised to change it. And third was contract farming. Why mustn't a farmer be given a choice to choose the product he wants to produce? It's unheard of in any other field, business or otherwise. Are our farmers slaves? What are they if not vote banks? We Indians are treating them as slaves because we are dictating. And ICAR survey brought out, said 58% of the existing farmers do not want their sons and daughters to take up farming. This is the catastrophe. The people themselves don't want their next of kin to take farming. This is the tragedy, and these farm laws promise to change that. But you know what the real tragedy is? That some of these farm reforms are already being enacted by the opposition. The then Congress government in Punjab had actually given Reliance 6,000 crores to carry out contract farming. They had an act. But when this government did it, you blocked 5 highways of Delhi for a year, incurring a loss of 3,000 crores for the businesses that were in and around those highways for a year. Who pays for it? Which head rolled? Is this not a banana republic? And I have no expectations from politicians because they are politicians by definition. Their primary interest lies somewhere else. I'm sorry if I'm being cynical. But my expectations were with the Lords, with the Supreme Court. And here the tragedy hits you. Because the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, asked, not rhetorically, but seriously, I see only the then Chief Justice, I think Bodbe was his name. I hope he's not listening to this because there already is a contempt case against me. But ex-Chief Justices cannot file a criminal contempt, thankfully. Lord have mercy. He asked, not rhetorically, but seriously, I see only those who are against the farm bills. Where are those who are for the farm bills? And then I realized, this country, there is no hope. Because those who are for the farm bills were working in the farms. They were the wealth creators. They were creating the produce that you would be eating in Telangana, in Andhra, in Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, in Odisha, in Assam. You want them to leave all that what they're doing, take a trip to Tilak Marg and stand outside Supreme Court and say, my lord, we are for the farm bills. What kind of banana republic is this? And that is why that signaled to me that in this country, you will always have victory of the anarchists. And then after the Supreme Court had adjudicated, after the government repealed these farm bills, a dark day of democracy, then miraculously the Supreme Court authored report came out that 82% of the farmers were for the farm bills. 82%. And why wouldn't they be? Now, is this the way to become a developed nation? It's a very simple question. And honestly, Americans have figured it out. They can sue the government through class action suit if they don't like a decision. American governments, federal, non-federal, were scared in many of the cases where they, had the lockdowns. Because a lockdown, bureaucrats don't suffer, politicians don't suffer, but the guy running a hairdressing salon or a restaurant, he's the one, his life is on the line, his family. And if he says that you've clamped the lockdown without any scientific basis, Texas government was sued. It had to take back the lockdown for about a week, 10 days. In this country, if I was a farmer, if this was not a banana republic, I would have sued the government that you bring in taxes retrospectively. You amend FCRA acts retrospectively. Out here, I as a farmer, you promised me great prosperity and wealth through these farm bills. You implemented those farm bills. And without giving any concrete reason, you took them back. Compensate me. Did anyone think of this? No. So not only do we incur a tragedy, we seem to be enabling tragedies. And that going forward, I think that is one of the reasons. This is why I bring in this concept of missed opportunities more than the opportunities. This has really hit me hard. I'm not being cynical here at all. I'm being realistic. Not one head rolled. Not one farmer was compensated. Tomorrow, the same produce, and you saw those images a week ago. You have thousands of Punjab farmers emptying their capsicum produce on the streets. Thousands of tons of green capsicum. Streets have been colored green. Why? Because the government said we are not in a position to give you 1 rupee, more than 1 rupee per kg. The farmers dumped it. These farm laws, had they been there, they would have taken it to the market, and people who wanted to buy could have. Simple economics, Reasonomics as you call it. But we fail to see that. Finally, there are a lot of other issues, and I think for want of time, one of course is that we've always failed to see the lowest hanging fruit, and we fail to pluck it. Tourism is one example. I have the data before me that 11 million, 12 million foreigners visit India every year, whole of the country. 83 million foreigners visit Paris every year. What are we talking about? It is one of the lowest hanging fruits. There are more hotel rooms in UAE than there are in India. And I can give you all that data. The amount of money that we give to municipality of Bodh Gaya, that should be the Vatican of the East, is equivalent to 4 full newspaper size ads that governments put out every day. We are somehow failing to see the larger picture that will take us to 2047. We just don't realize it. How tourism, how this amazing cultural wealth of this country can rejuvenate not just a few societies or states, but the country itself. Not only will it give tremendous employment, it has the ability to give us confidence that yes, India of the past was glorious. And what best way to showcase this than tourism? And finally, because this is something very dear to you, is industry and businesses. And this is almost, if not more tragic than the taking back of the farm reforms. The next 5 minutes I'll talk of this and then And the reason for that is that one of the few things that enamored me to Narendra Modi in 2013 was his iconic phrase that he repeated multiple times, which is that a government has no business to be in business. I said, here is a leader who's actually saying something which is logical, which is rational, which this country has been crying out for ever since Ambedkar made the constitution and refused to put the word socialism in the preamble. That was later put by Indira Gandhi anyway during the emergency. But they asked Ambedkar, why, sir, why haven't you put socialism? And what he said was iconic. He said, today we are a socialist country, but I don't want India to remain socialist. Because socialism is shackling the population. Socialism is antithetical to the Darwinian evolution. May the best man or woman win. How else are you going to proceed if not without competition? That is the bedrock of progress. That is how societies prosper, companies prosper. Survival of the fittest. But socialism disallows all that spectacularly. And India was shackled with socialism till the 1990s, even a lot beyond that. But unfortunately, in the last 9 years, all what this government has done is to be in the business of running businesses. I catalogued the number of public sector units that we have. It took me some time. 6 months ago, I published this piece. So we have 1,860 public sector units. We had 1,810 in 2014. So we have increased the number of public sector units. And those amongst you who are in charge of PSUs, please don't mind me. I just say this. Because these are facts, irrefutable facts. India recedes vote bank by vote bank, PSU by PSU. It's a bare fact. And the reason for that is that 400 of these public sector units are non-functional. And yet, 21% of our annual budgeted allowance that Ms. Sitaraman spends, 45 lakh odd crores, 21% of them goes up in propping these public sector units, incurring huge loss to the nation. And when I say 400 of them are non-functional and yet leeching money, giving you just one example, thankfully, last January, India, I don't know how, maybe it was some bureaucrat made a mistake, but they actually shut down a PSU. Maybe they'll revise it and say, ye to galti ho gayi bahut badi. But that PSU's job was to make chlorofluorocarbons. It was leaching 3,000 crores every year, till as late as 2020. Chlorofluorocarbons were banned by the UN and the WHO in the late 1980s. And yet this behemoth existed, and yet we were paying for it. Is that not corruption, I ask you? Is corruption only when you catch someone paying 20 rupees bribe and you throw him in jail? What about this 8 lakh crore bribe that we are giving every year? To placate whom? To destroy us. When we know the facts that India cannot grow, cannot be developed, leave alone 2047 till 2147. If we were to repeat the mistakes that Nehru, Indira, Rajiv and Modi are making of harking back on socialism. But the tragedy is that even beyond PSUs, this whole thing carries on because we don't seem to realize. Many people say, well, there are some profit-making PSUs, as if that's a great thing. There are about a dozen of them, I do admit, Navratnas amongst them. Out of 1,800, I mean, you look at the ratio, that itself is embarrassing, but even beyond that, I ask you the question, any PSU, if it's making profit, if you put it in private hands, it would be making 10 times or 20 times the profit it is. Governments cannot run businesses. We must realize this. And the hall that would realize this and propagate this is this hall. It is not the government's job to run businesses. And yet we are increasingly. Hotels. The only privatization that has happened in the 9 years has been Air India, just one. And that too, after people talking about it for 20, 30 years. The pulling of wool before your eyes is this fact that government has been doing disinvestment. A, disinvestment is not privatization, and B, whatever is being disinvested from one PSU, the other PSU is being forced to take it. Poor LIC is always the guy holding the can. कह रहे मुझे ही दे देते हो यार, कोल इंडिया का सारा पैसा, निपटो टिप्सी सारा का सारा जंक मेरे को दे रहे हो. पहले अदानी से तो निपट लूं. The fact of the matter is, these are not solutions that through Eureka we are discussing now. These are things that we should have done 60 years ago, that Ambedkar wanted done. So why is it that we are dreaming of 2047 without improving, without taking these simple elementary steps now? And I'll finish by telling you why, and this is the real tragedy. Montek Singh Ahluwalia and Manmohan Singh junked the old pension scheme. Montek took, the Congress, they took 5 years to come up with new pension scheme. They implemented it in a lot of states, almost every state. I think this year or last December during Himachal elections, the Congress's promise was that we will revert to old pension scheme. Congress won the election. Won it. Knowing fully well that it's going to bankrupt the state. Knowing fully well that 82% of the tax collection of Himachal will go into propping up this junk old pension scheme. And when Congress saw that we won because of this, state after state reverted to old pension scheme. Punjab was next, Chhattisgarh was next, Rajasthan was next. 15 lakh workers in Maharashtra went on a strike, imploring the BJP Shiv Sena government to revert to old pension scheme. What do you think you're going to do? Come the elections, they're going to revert to old pension scheme. So I ask you again, who is to blame? Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Manmohan Singh, Narendra Modi through the farm reforms, or us, who can see the lights, but we don't have cracks in the wells in which we are living for allowing that light to enter in. I shall finish there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.